Now, uncertainty lingers over whether the European Union is obligated to invest $600 billion in the US as part of a trade agreement reached with the Trump administration in late July. President Trump has threatened to raise tariffs on European goods to 35% if the investment isn't made by the end of his term in office by EU officials. They say they lack the power to make that happen. William Denzelo reports from Brussels.
The European Commission insists that this $600 billion investment in the US is non-binding and that it's really not in their control. They say it's a matter for the private sector here in Europe to decide. However, they say they have made this proclaimment, this framework agreement reached with the Trump administration. Having consulted with the private sector, they believe they've acted in good faith that that $600 billion figure is obtainable, but by no means a guarantee. As far, though, as the Trump administration is concerned, well, they say that unless the EU come up with that investment by the end of Donald Trump's term in office in a few years' time, that he says that the EU will be hit with tariffs of 35% as a baseline. This comes just days after a framework agreement was reached between President Trump and European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, just shy of that deadline that would have seen tariffs go to 30% as a baseline for European goods. However, that framework has been reached, which means that as of now, the framework tariff rate is 15%. That is far higher than many European member states and business leaders here in Europe wanted to see. However, the message from the European Commission, they say they have gotten a better deal than anyone. The reason for this is that while that 15% isn't the lowest base rate going around, the UK, for example, has a 10% tariff base rate deal with the US, but the European Commission says that there's no stacking involved, which means that goods going to the United States will just be subject to a 15% figure. They argue that goods coming from nations like the United Kingdom might be subject to a 10% base rate tariff, but there are other additional tariffs that will be added onto that, which will mean it'll be higher before it gets to its end destination. That is why the EU says that the deal reached with Washington is the best possible one they could have reached in difficult circumstances. But this framework agreement is not legally binding. There is no joint text yet. We still don't know when the two sides will be able to agree it. Conversations are still ongoing. Plenty of issues still need to be ironed out, such as what will be exempt from this baseline 15% rate. The likes of the wine and spirit sector still hoping for a carve-out, so much still needs to be decided. Still plenty of sticking points. The EU says it hopes that they can overcome these quickly and to move on to what they describe as bigger issues, such as working on ways to make more goods in the future exempt from tariffs. William Denzelo, SABC News, Brussels.